Hey, good morning. Welcome back to our series called World War F. And this is the coming financial war, and we're discussing some of the challenges in our world today. And this section is really, just talking about what's happening in the present time. So, really, the last 2, 3 years, what's going on. And so, we'll be talking a little bit about land. We talked in the last couple segments about property rights in the Bible and kind of what's happening now. So let's jump in. So while the U.S. Was founded on individual rights, including property rights, and that those were sort of core tenets of the foundation of our country, and really synonymous with people, there's some new realities. And so I think I mentioned this in our last time, but the government really has three functions, or it's supposed to have three major functions. One is the defense of a nation. Two is enforcing contracts between individuals. And number three is protecting its citizens against crimes to them or to their personal property. So that's really it. And so I said in the last segment, and I'll say it again, that the government should be a ref, not a player. And it's becoming more of a major player. And so, first starting in England and then the United States, it just reality that wealth was democratized. It was a way of giving people the opportunity to own land. And I talked a little bit about this, but this is how people create wealth. They buy ideas, or they create ideas, they generate ideas, and then they utilize that idea to buy assets that appreciate or that create products or facilitate services. Then eventually they buy real estate. And so this was massively decentralized and considered to be one of the greatest ideas in human history. It's created wealth for millions and millions, billions of people, as the ideas that started here in the 13 original colonies really spread worldwide. And people have attempted to manipulate and put their own spin on economically what that looks like. But this basic idea is really tied up in, I think, the Judeo values we see in the Old Testament and then put forth even further in principle in the New Testament. Well, what now? Well, now we're seeing different elite groups of people, big business, people with specific interests that are trying to consolidate wealth and power. That's always what happens. Whenever somebody gains a position, what do you want to do? You want to strengthen your position, you want to fortify your position, and you want to add to it. And so, post the Great Recession in 2008, 2009, there was a limited supply and access to new property, and there were some rules and things created, I think, with some good intention, but also there are always nefarious players that are trying to find an angle. And so, all of those regulations that government added, um, according to the National Association of Home Builders, adds about $94,000 to the average cost of a home. And then you have property taxes, which is becoming a major issue, especially here in Ohio, where, if the homes just keep appreciating, let's say you have a 1% property tax. Okay, well, that's doable. But you never stop paying that. It's always literally a tax. You've already paid taxes on your income, and now you're going to pay it on your property. Okay. And so in some places in Columbus, you've got up to 2% a property tax on your home, your domicile, your place of residence. And that's just one part of the tax. There's city tax on top of that. And so, of course, we all want great schools. But there's some limits there, as if the home values just keep increasing because the value of the dollar's decreasing, it's going to cause the cost of stuff to go up. But if you haven't adjusted those property taxes, it means you never really own your place. You never really own your stuff. And that's very challenging. We're just watching that take place. And so, COVID mandates in which 1 million small businesses closed, and it added about $3.4 trillion to 7 tech companies. So on the land side, more people are investing time and energy and even money to purchase things they don't actually own. Buying virtual goods where you don't actually have an asset appreciation. I'm on my kids all the time about this when it comes to buying clothes on a video game like Roblox or whatever. Is to say, don't buy something that doesn't actually manifest physically in the real world. So then you see all the work that's being done on derivative works, memes, gifts by third parties. And in some ways, stealing intellectual property, which China has been doing all along, is being more normalized, or is attempting to be more normalized in parts of the Western world. And so it's just a thing. And it's a challenge to the system because we're not only captive to the system, but in some ways we become agents of it. So just to say, just like with some of the resources and things I use, if anybody asks me for where did I get this idea, I was always prepared to answer that. And even in this series, we've already mentioned that the book that kind of kicked off this series, and one that we've referenced a number of times, is You'll Own Nothing by Carol Roth. But that stealing principle is problematic for a lot of reasons. And so remember the adage that if the product is free to use, a la Facebook or TikTok or whatever, you're the product. And so you see this impacting our world. And so let me just introduce to you, maybe more fully than I have in some of the other videos, the World Economic Forum. Okay, so in the book, this is right from Carol's book, she tells a story that's from the Twilight Zone series, which was really a phenomenal series. That predates me, but they had some really good kind of thoughtful pieces. And so there's a famous episode of the Twilight Zone where the aliens invade, or they land at Earth, and they're uninvited, and people are afraid, and they're concerned that the aliens are there to sort of take over. But the aliens, they really want to assure, the public they're there to serve. And at first, people are very skeptical, like people always are. Why would they want to do that? Why would that benefit them? And they give us more advanced technology. They begin solving problems of world hunger. And they, just are doing all these things. Well, a special government agency discovers a book that one of the aliens left behind at one of the meetings. And so they decide they're going to decode this book, figure out how to translate their language. And the title of the book is simply entitled To Serve Man. And so that seems, innocuous enough, seems innocent enough, seems like a noble title. It's simply, consistent with their worthy intentions that they've demonstrated thus far. And so people begin to be really ready to line up and help and listen to what these aliens that have come from outer space are saying to them. And so they start now visiting the alien planet. And so ultimately there's a lady who decodes the book to try to figure out what the rest of it means. And she's working on it through the episode. And the episode ends with her screaming at her boss as he gets on the spacecraft not to get on, because To Serve Man is actually a cookbook. And so the point of the episode is sometimes things that sound good and even start out good actually end up being not so good. And we see that all the time with a new program, a new idea from some government somewhere. And so when it comes to these ideas, the World Economic Forum was a organization created by a guy named Klaus Schwab. And it's an elite think tank. And they're not trying to be nefarious, I don't think, but they're thinking from their position. And so Schwab has said things like, we penetrate cabinets. And it's very influential. It's got some big business and influential political leaders on it. And some of the ideas are kind of wild. And that's not just me saying it. That's, other people from Harvard and Yale and other schools saying, well, that's an interesting idea. And one of their ideas is this idea of the Great Reset. It was launched by Schwab in a book he wrote detailing the idea of using WEF to leverage the COVID pandemic crisis to really reshape the world for the good of humanity. And in a video uploaded in 2017 to the WEF's YouTube page, it suggests that you will rent everything in life and you'll be happy is the is the byline. And so in the video, they're trying to normalize this idea that it's just going to be better if we rent everything. And I think their packaging is actually not uncompelling. The trouble is that who's going to control the rent in the long term? And so what are they doing? They're trying to socialize ownership. So their predictions is one, that you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. And number two, that the U.S. won't be a leading superpower. A handful of countries will dominate. So I don't want to get into the tit for tat thing with any organization. But there's some crazy stuff there. I think that their number 4 thing is that, you're going to eat less meat, an occasional treat good for the environment and our health. Number 8, Western values have been tested to the breaking point. And so who are they to say that our values as Christians, are no longer of value? And I think that there's some real challenges there. And so they want you to take your life, and they want to take your life, and they want to rent it back to you, essentially. And they have proposals on money and ideas going in every aspect of our life. And so from Amazon to Zoom, you see this. And so another one is called the Davos World Economic Forum. It's expensive. It's generated about $300 million in 2020 and 2021. And it's actually collected money from taxpayers around the world. It pays no federal taxes to the Swiss because of the way that it's been organized. And, if I were them, I would have done the same thing. Nobody wants to pay taxes, it seems. And yet we need taxes to be paid. But we just don't need to be overtaxed. So I could list a bunch of different global organizations. Another one is the World Health Organization, who receives $6 billion a year. My point is that with any kind of economic structure or bureaucratic structure, there's just a lot of that going on these days. Everybody's trying to build their own network and profit off of the backs of other people. And so in any of those spaces, you have some different groups, I think, socially. You have your believers. They've really drank the Kool-Aid. The believers, they're the racketeers. And then there are the used and the useful idiots in any of those spaces. And I don't think that the U.S. Is alone, but I don't think that we have taken care of our unique structure, and we've allowed the unique freedoms that we've had to go through the same cycles that other empires have gone before it. I think there are some who are trying to not isolate, but they're trying to push out people that are just looking to profit and not be an owner. Okay, this is why I think it's important for us to think about the idea of when we shift from owning land to renting, it puts us in bad positions. And when we think about long-term realities on some of that stuff, it's problematic. Anytime somebody doesn't actually have to do something in a geographic place with a specific group of people, as a pastor or a leader, it just becomes problematic. Their shift in mindset changes. It changes from a, hey, thank you for supporting us kind of a mindset. And it's troubling. All right, well, let's talk a little bit more about the shrinking dollar. And so this is a topic that's pretty hot in 2025, and it's important to just discuss it. So our wealth, your wealth, is being killed by debasing the U.S. currency. French economist once said, this is Frederick Bastiat, said once that plundering becomes a way of life for a group of men living together in society. When plundering becomes a way of life for a group of men living in society, they will create for themselves, in the course of time, a legal system that authorizes it and a moral code that glorifies it. And as I just said, any bureaucratic structure that's not held accountable is going to begin to do those things, and it's troubling. And so the instability of the U.S. dollar is really at the center of today's world. And the U.S. government and the Fed have absolutely failed to manage the dollar for the benefit of the people of the United States, or even for the world. And that mismanagement will usher in a new world order. And last time I checked, the debt clock we were at 120% of our debts, meaning we are very much at the moment where we can no longer service those debts without making drastic changes. So there was a time, really probably early 2000s to now, where we could have made some changes. And I will put this at the feet of multiple feds and multiple presidents who failed to have the cojones, the willingness to do difficult things, to pull back on all that spending and to make a budget that was actually a budget. And it didn't matter who was in office, Republican, Democrat, they all spent money. They always felt like they had to spend their way out of the next crisis. And that's created a much bigger crisis than any one of those. And it's a concern that we all have. And now we're in a space where, unless there's something that happens from outside that's significant, there's no real opportunity for us to leverage that except to really get austere. And it just doesn't seem like there's an appetite for that. We've created our own monsters in this space. And so when you study the Roman Empire and you study Jesus and you become aware of what's happening in that moment in human history, it's a really strategic time, right on the twilight of the fall of the Roman Empire. And God sees into human history and he secures a moment that will actually allow the gospel to go worldwide in 250 years. And I think we're kind of seeing a second Roman Empire that may fall. I pray I'm wrong here, but as with the Roman Empire, it's from within that the U.S. falls because it fails to manage the value of its money. And the Empire of Rome fell for many reasons. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about this, but stable money equals stable society. Stable money was of value to Rome, but their large expansion, so the Roman expansion in government and spending and administration and on war, really set them on a path of currency debasement. And that over time became its own destruction. And so the Romans began with the denarius. They also had the silver coin. In the Bible, you can see Jesus telling Peter to get a coin from a fish, which was for about 300 years, kept stable by different leaders. And the denarius was stable. It was about 95% silver. Well, that really shifted under the Emperor Nero. And he called into his coffers, he called all the coins back out of currency. And because he had so many debts, he actually melted them down. And here's the catch, that he changed their makeup. He made the coins smaller out of lesser value material. And so it was pretty crazy. So, and the gold auris, named after Marcus Aurelius, it's part of the whole thing. And so by doing this, Nero, he became richer while everyone else in the empire became poor. And he used that melt to pay down all the expenses. And after he'd killed Peter and some of the other Christians, future leaders after Nero did exactly the same thing. They extracted wealth and they did the process of currency debasement. So it's pretty wild what was going on. So historian Joe Purdon notes that by the middle of the 3rd century, the denarius contained 0.5% silver, and the gold auris, starting out at worth about 25 denarii within a few hundred years, so it was worth thousands of denarii. And so perception becomes a problem when the unit isn't constant. And that's part of the inflationary journey for any country that's so dangerous. And so the dollar, as we go back to it, we've seen this episode before. So the dollar's lost almost 97% of its purchasing power from 1913 through debasement. Printing money, adjusting indexes. This is literally stealing the creation of wealth. And about 86% of that happened since 1971 when we came off the gold standard. I think I mentioned in a previous episode, Brenton Woods and kind of how we moved on to the petrodollar. So money isn't naturally eroded by inflation. Inflation is caused by physical and monetary policy. So if you and I were to go to the local bank and say, hey, I want to add a couple zeros to my bank account because I need to pay for something, they would say that's stealing or fraud. But when the Fed does it, it's called monetary policy. And that's nuts. That's nuts. It's a scam. It always was. And so I'm just going to tell you the problem we're having is the Fed. And the Fed is the central bank of the United States. It's now a prop of the U.S. government to aid Wall Street and enable government spending. And basically, the Fed can change the balance of money in its account at any time. And so this is a concern. This is a problem that that's going to take place. And so now the Fed can massively interfere in our economy. And so from printing money from Nero to Ben Bernanke to Jerome Powell, it's considered just more of the same as far as I'm concerned. And so, so the Fed, again, can now interfere in the economy. It's expanded significantly in the last 15 years. During the recession, Ben Bernanke blew the doors off of the Fed's balance sheet. So before the 1990s, it was less than $100 million that the Fed was involved in. Ben added $1 trillion in which he could sort of move money around. And they did this to save housing. And so what the Fed did was it bought securities on the open market and again expanded its balance sheet massively. And this was called quantitative easing, which is just a made-up phrase for, hey, we're going to print money out of whole cloth. And then the Fed kept the interest rate between 0 and 0.25 for 7 years, which was great for buying a house. But by 2009, the Fed's balance sheet was almost $3 trillion. Again, this is the equivalent to Nero melting down coins, taking the silver out of the denarii and basically making it nickel. It seemingly to have the same value, but actually not being very valuable at all. And so the big lie in all of this, do you remember what the line was, why they had to do this? Do you remember? They had to do this because business was too big to fail. And so, people were ruined, businesses were ruined, small business was just gone, and, COVID did the same thing. But the financial sector, hey, it was fine. It did just fine. And so the long tail on a lot of this stuff is still being felt today. It was easy money for large corporations, but again, the local community and Main Street lost. And so it impacted lots of different people, retirees, it impacted people on a fixed income. And when you look at the Fed chair and the people associated, just know this, they're always well connected. They're there to serve a purpose. They're to help finance the people that are the people in real power. They created the central banking system, and the government and the politicians are often useful and co-profiteers in all of that. And the biggest lie ever is that inflation is transitory. It's not. The only way inflation is transitory is if you and I and the government stop spending money, but if you and I add real value. And what's real value? Real value is when we add quality. Real value is when we actually invent something new. One of the reasons NVIDIA is such a huge company now is because it's one of the few companies that's created an innovative product that adds real value. And so a lot of these other places, that grow at a 1, 2, 5% per year, that's just adjusted for a little bit of growth. That's not massive growth. And that's what's going to be required to adjust inflation. Inflation doesn't go down unless you and I create more value than what is out there. All right, so all this leads me to the digital dollar. So if the government wanted to go back to China, and we talked about China, and we talked about social credit and social credit systems. If the government wanted to control you, the easiest way to do that is to do that through money. And governments already do this. They try to do this through behavioral taxes. They tax alcohol. They tax soft drinks. If you're from a coastal community. They also provide tax credits for going green on vehicles and solar panels. And some of that can be motivating. Some of it's logical. Some of it's not a bad thing. But it's all, it's all coercive capitalism. And the digital dollar may seem like a good idea. In fact, I barely carry cash myself. Many of us have digital wallets. We've got Venmo, Cash App. And one of the aspects is that it can be programmable. And because of this, each dollar can have a unique identifier. Think about that. So our government can track really where it all goes. And so the digital dollar is not crypto. Some of the government officials were trying to, I think, intentionally confuse the issue to try to get people to buy into this idea of the digital dollar. Crypto is, it's not controlled by a specific government. And so, one of the comments that Carol has in the book is that you should own your money or your money will own you. And so the people that are proposing this are the very same people who, in fact, devalued your dollar. And so my concern with it is that it's going to give the government a treasure trove of information about what you're doing and with whom. And now, listen, I know there are lots of nefarious people out there, but there are a lot of good people out there too. And I just don't want the government to control all of that. I don't think that's the business of the government, and I just don't think it's helpful. And so you've got to kind of watch this. And here's kind of where I'm going with all of this and this conversation is that I think in the future it's going to be difficult to get away from this. I think products are eventually going to be turned into services. Let me say that again. I think products are eventually going to be turned into services. And people have sort of figured out that if people are living longer, people get to a place where they have enough stuff that they don't need to buy as much anymore. That is, unless there's a subscription for a product that they use. And this is really what the World Economic Forum is talking about. So again, imagine paying for a car in a winter state and the dealer saying, hey, do you want the subscription to utilize the heated seats? And it's $18 a month. It's the cost of a little more than a Netflix subscription, just to add more and to take them a little bit more. And because of the rise of technology and bureaucracy and the rise now of technocrats, I think you're going to see terms of service. There's going to be an attempt where terms of service are going to replace moral code. And because of that, big tech will have more of a leverage to censure what is being said out there in the world today. And so I think we're going to get to a place where they're going to try to rent the American dream to the public. And my hope is that you will resist that and that you'll actually own your stuff, because it'll be benefit for all of us. All right, well, we'll jump into the next part of the series coming up a little later on. Thanks for joining.